Stanley Avenue and Highway 405 looking north. And at the top of the image, you'll see Lake Ontario. On the right side, you'll see portions of the Niagara River, and you see probably 3/4 of the Queenston Quarry site. It is 257 acres. And this line here, Amy, is everyone able to see my cursor, by the way? I just wasn't sure about that.
Yes, they can. Yes, they can.
Okay, so this line here is the brow of the escarpment, starting at the Brock Monument over to your right, and then the brow is where the Bruce Trail runs along, and all of the natural features of the brow of the escarpment, the Bruce Trail, the face of the escarpment, is all owned by the Niagara Parks Commission. The Queenston Quarry donated 100 acres of the brow and face of the escarpment to Ontario Heritage Trust, who then transferred it to the Niagara Parks Commission. So our what was left in terms of ownership to Lafarge and us is just called it the raw industrial quarry. So all the heritage and important remnant features are all under public ownership. So the the Queenston Quarry produced some of the highest quality building stone. Frankly, has been regarded as some of the premium building stone in the world, but certainly is one of the prime quarries in Canada. And it was a key building block for Upper Canada for builders, architects, and created some of Ontario's and Canada's most important buildings and monuments. Although the large-scale quarrying operations have come to an end, there is still the diverse flora and fauna of the Carolinian forest, although it is regenerated Carolinian forest in its location, and it is a UNESCO World Biosphere Reserve and under control by the Niagara Escarpment Commission. The combination of the site's natural and cultural resources expressed in many ways which humans have used and adapted this landscape for their needs and desires, and to place humanity within an interconnected ecology in an ever-shifting world. So together, the characteristics that shape this landscape, that define the site, the rich historical and cultural significance, our restoration and transformation of the Queenston Quarry will harmoniously add another layer to the significant site by drawing inspiration from and celebrating its historic past. Well, the ancient geology. I'm going to kind of show you this sea bottom here with my cursor, and these crinoids. And these are kind of the key elements of what is today the Queenston Quarry and the Niagara Escarpment. So the formation of the Niagara Escarpment started over 400 million years ago, and it was actually located south of the equator. And the environment was a shallow saltwater sea teeming with marine life. There were no plants and animals existing yet, but this shallow saltwater sea was teeming with marine life, shellfish, coral, and in particular, crinoids. As great storms came about, this marine life would die and settle to the bottom. And ultimately, this is a fossil of a crinoid from 400 million years ago. And I thank Bob Watson, who's supplied me with these images. This is a fossil of a crinoid fossil, and give you a sense of scale. And so at first glance, the crinoids appear like plants. However, they were marine life related to starfish and sea urchins. The crinoids consisted of a thin calcareous stem that secured the sea bottom with a cupric calyx at the top of the stem and had feathery arms that filtered nutrients from the water. Crinoids thrived in warm, shallow water where currents and waves continually agitated the clear marine waters in the area that would become the Niagara Peninsula as we know it today. The conditions were ideal for crinoid habitat, leading to vast thickness of them on the seabed. But when the crinoids died, the waves and currents broke up the fragile remnants to form crinoidal sands. Over time, this marine environment evolved, and the once shallow sea deepened and the continental land masses shifted. So literally the continental plate shifted from south of the equator to what is now today the Niagara Escarpment. The crinoids no longer thrived in this changed environment, and the remnants were buried by succeeding sediments, including sand and clay runoff carried by rivers over millions of years. And through pressure, heat, and chemical reactions, the sediments of the sand, clay and calcium carbonate accumulated and became varied types of stone. Sand sediments formed sandstone, clay became shale, calcium carbonate became limestone, and then when there was magnesium in the sediment, dolostone. As the massive glaciers that covered the Niagara region in the last ice age retreated northwards, it's about 14,000 years ago, the stripped land was exposed and the remarkable enduring rise of the Niagara Escarpment. So what was this sea bottom, and as the glaciers retreated north, so this is an image of the Brock Monument, the formation of the Niagara Escarpment emerged. And this is a view of the Niagara Escarpment from St. David's looking up. And again, this is created through that sedimentary environment, and in particular, the crinoids will be the key element for Queenston limestone. So along the brow of the escarpment, starting at the brow and moving in the south direction, in this particular image is inside the quarry at the east end of the site today, just probably 200 feet north of the 405. And these two bedding layers here is the prized Queenston limestone made of just those crinoids that have been compressed and calcified. And this is what was the prize stone. The stone above it is called Goat Island, and this is Queenston. This is the same profile of Niagara Falls. When water comes over Niagara Falls, it goes over the Goat Island, then the Gasport Formation, and then the quarry floor today is Rochester Shale. This image may be familiar to some of you. This is a view looking across the Niagara Gorge. And this here is the Gasport limestone that was made of the crinoids and is the prize building stone. The Goat Island is above it. This is all the Rochester Shale. So our quarry floor today is at this elevation. The Queenston Quarry is a relatively shallow quarry, about 60 feet in total. And then they couldn't mine any further down because you hit the Rochester Shale and that was too soft to be of any use for any aggregate or building material for roads. The Grimsby sandstone and the Whirlpool sandstone. Queenston limestone erodes about 1 millimeter every 50 years. And then this now are the crinoids coming back to his life, if you want to call it, and manifesting themselves in the Queenston stone. When you polish Queenston limestone, and this are the same fossils of the crinoids appearing in a polished finish. So then, so that was the kind of the geological background. And then, as we know, kind of the settlement of the Niagara Peninsula, and I'll just discuss it very briefly. So the neutral population who probably settled in the Niagara Peninsula steady declined through the 17th century due to famine, war, and among nations, and the increasing number of European settlers. The remaining population of neutral confederacy was killed and dispersed in joining other indigenous nations by the mid-17th century. But prior to European settlers, arrival in the Niagara region and the greater Southern Ontario was a dramatically different landscape. Now the area was covered with expansive mature Carolinian forests with dense tree canopies with a diverse range of species. The forested landscape of Ontario was viewed by settlers as an environment to be tamed and utilized, cutting timber for European markets, developing, implementing sweeping land surveys for agricultural settlements and road building. In this process, the natural character of Southern Ontario was definitively altered within less than 100 years. Remarkably, trees of the former Carolinian forest that once covered the province persist along the escarpment and demonstrate the complex ecosystems that exist along the cliff face. The internationally recognized UNESCO World Biosphere supports hundreds of at-risk species that coexist alongside most of the densely populated and heavily developed region in Canada. The Queenston Quarry, perched on the edge of the Niagara Escarpment, offers a glimpse into this historic natural landscape. So then as the United Import Loyalists and European settlers came to Canada, they used the farming techniques that learned by the indigenous farming techniques to create farmsteads. And early colonial farms had a mixture of crops, including wheat, oats, barley, corn, as well as domestic animals. So this is the plains of Niagara-on-the-Lake. So as the glaciers retreated, creating rich soils that we now know as Niagara-on-the-Lake, and having, remember, the premium agricultural environment. This is the brow of the Niagara Escarpment. The Brock Monument is over here. That's the OPG reservoir across the street for the hydroelectric power generation. That's the brow of the escarpment. The Queenston Quarry land here is up on top of the escarpment, a little private, a little hidden valley on top of the escarpment. And this is the rail line that goes along Concession 1, the Upper Canada Heritage Trail that goes all the way to Old Town Niagara-on-the-Lake. And this is the remnant of the rail line that hugs the escarpment and came to the quarry, among many other rail lines. But this one is, absolutely quite visible. So unique to the Queenston Quarry in this landscape is that pretty much any famous quarry in Canada, any remnant existence of it is pretty much wiped out. And Queenston Quarry is really the only place where these cultural landscapes are still in place. So after the treaty with the Niagara, the Treaty of Niagara in 1764, James Seacourt was one of the first settlers of Upper Canada and was provided with, I believe, 1,000 acres. It may have been more, and what became the Seacourt Farm. So although this doesn't look look like an image that's recognizable, but this black is the escarpment brow. This line here is York Road. This is the brow of the escarpment here, with the Brock Monument over here. And the Seacourt Farm was all of this. And so he was one of the first settlers of Upper Canada. When he died, he left his estate to David Seacourt and James Jr. It was James Jr. that married Laura Ingersoll, being Laura Seacourt. So before it was the Queenston Quarry, it was the Seacourt Farm, and also inhabited by James Jr. and Laura before they moved to the village of Queenston. Organic farming, or farming, is a component of our vision and master plan. And as a result, we've acquired the property across the street from the quarry. Some of you may recognize this, where right at Stanley and Town Line Road, we've started an organic farm. Well, specifically, we have working with and leased the lands to Michael Wakel, co-owner of White Oaks, who has a wonderful passion for nutrition, health, and fitness. And Michael has started what's called the Always June Organic Farm. And this organic farming is the thin edge of the wedge, which will carry on into the Queenston Quarry. This produce is here from last fall, and some of you may have noticed some activity there, and the farm will be fully operational by this June, possibly May. We planted 21 varieties of vegetables and produce. So from the Secord farm, we move, and there's just some produce from the farm. Allow me to move to the industrial history of the Queenston Quarry. This is an amazing image, and this is where, you know, these incredible monuments, the Brock Monument, the bridge that spanned the Niagara River at the village of Queenston, what is probably now the Rainbow Bridge. In order to make these amazing monuments and structures, the only way to do that was to have the very, very best building stone that could withstand the engineering compression strength required for buildings and monuments. This is an image of the Bruce Trail right at the brow of the escarpment, and this is where the quarrying activity started. And at the brow, we call it kind of the north edge of this, what is the Queenston Quarry. This is all under public ownership by the Niagara Parks Commission. And then what is now the Queenston Quarry is just south of this. Included on the brow, and these cement kilns are still there today. They're quite extraordinary. They're massive. They're again under ownership of the Niagara Parks Commission. But there was also a bedding layer, a 1 meter bedding layer below Queenston that was called the Q, and that the Q was harvested and crushed and put into these kilns and baked to make Upper Canada's first cement. And so these are the kilns just above York Road, and this is the rail line, same rail line that connects to the Upper Canada Heritage Trail. And those kilns are still there today and are in need of restoration. I have been communicating with the Niagara Parks Commission the importance of that industrial history and those kilns being preserved. So the amazing blue dolomite, it was called a bluestone. When you first cut it open, it has almost a very bluish type color, or kind of a deep, rich gray bluish color. And it was these amazing quarry blocks that became quite literally and figuratively the building blocks of Upper Canada. In order for any engineer or architect or builder, in order to build a structure, only the very best stone could support the compression strength of the weight of that structure, and only Queenston limestone had that capability. So over time, the recognition of the Queenston stone spread, and it became the sought-after building material throughout Canada. And it's in McMaster University, the Whitney Block at Queen's Park, Union Station, Royal Ontario Museum, Queen's University, the Governor General's residence. And the stone was also shipped internationally to the United States and England, and is in construction of the Canada House in London. Of important significance is the ceremonial building for the House of Commons. It was a former Bank of Montreal building, and is now one of the most important reception areas on Parliament Hill. So any dignitary or speaker coming to Canada will now be greeted and provide their presentations or speaking in this building. And it is one of the most important reception areas for the prominent and national international visitors. The historic building exterior with fluted columns, the incest lettering, and the bas relief sculptures. These are some of the most important sculptures of Canadian landscapes in Canada, all built with Queenston limestone. This is the cornerstone. There's a new visitor center. Center block is under construction now. West block is the hosts the House of Commons, and there's a creation of a new visitors entrance. And this is the cornerstone laid by the Governor General, the Prime Minister, the head of the Senate, and the head of the House. This is the only time that the leader of all of those houses were in one location at one time. And this is the cornerstone. This was a joint venture with Willowbank. It was Willowbank's idea, but Queenston Quarry provided the cornerstone. Some of you may recognize the Landscape of Nations Monument at Queenston Heights Park. And I'll speak a little briefly to it. Niagara-on-the-Lake along the Niagara Escarpment was used as a resource area for hunting and fishing for Indigenous people, extending back for millennia through some 13,000 years. And such as the Seneca and Mohawk, as well as the Anishinaabe people like the Mississaugas were actively present. And this is why several First Nations and allied with Great Britain during the Revolutionary War and the War of 1812. And as a result of this history, it was only fitting that Queenston limestone be excavated from the Queenston Quarry to provide material for this landscape. It's called the Six Nations and Native Allies Commemorative Memorial and the First Nations Peace Monument. This is the block of stone that was 14, 15 feet long and 9 feet tall. And these are the monuments of Queenston limestone. In discussing the indigenous layer, I did, and this is going to be this is a screenshot that you could read in detail. There is an indigenous view of this area that is different than ours, but essentially the Haudenosaunee perspective essentially is that the patenting of the Niagara Strip violated the terms of the 1764 treaty. So the Niagara Strip is the 4 miles of land from the Niagara River going west from Lake Erie to Lake Ontario, including Niagara-on-the-Lake. And in the orange box is a summary of the 4 mile strip claim, and that is the indigenous view of this area. These are the gates for the Governor General's residence in Queenston limestone. This is what was the Rainbow Bridge, and this arch monument is no longer there on the Niagara Parkway. I'm doing some research as to the story behind why it was removed, but these art reliefs apparently have been preserved. And there's the Brock Hotel. There's a significant number of buildings in Quebec. This is the Royal Bank building in Montreal. There's also the Bell Canada building. These were the 2 most important buildings in Montreal, and the Royal Bank building was the tallest building in the British Empire in the 1930s, all built of Queenston limestone. This is West Block. I just recently provided these new steps. The West Block is now where the House of Commons is located, as Center Block is under restoration. Sections of Willowbank, the beams and lintels and the coursing is Queenston limestone in these gates. And this is a list, and the list is continuing of some of the most important buildings built from Queenston limestone. The locks of the Welland Canal, and you'll just see from Niagara Falls, pretty much everything on Parks Commission property is all Queenston limestone. Oaks Hall, the Oaks Theatre, all the stone lining the Niagara Parkway is Queenston limestone. And this is a brief summary. Because Center Block was going under restoration, this is the First World War Book of Remembrance. So the name of every Canadian that died in the First World War, their names are in this book, and each page is turned once every single day. And this is Queenston limestone base for that book. Queenston Quarry, the next 100 years. I just want to state that this is philosophically, I guess I found this quote provided to me from a Chinese art critic in the 12th century, and it captures, I guess, our vision, my vision, and if I could just read it to you. Beautiful are the landscapes which one may gaze. More beautiful are the landscapes in which one may travel, and most beautiful are the landscapes in which one may dwell. Another day, another time, we'll discuss why it is very difficult to be able to build and inhabit places that are beautiful. It's beautiful landscapes are properly preserved, but there are times that it is a very special opportunity to be able to dwell and inhabit a beautiful landscape. So the Queenston Quarry project looks to capture this this amazing place, the cultural richness of the quarry, and the important building stone that it created for Upper Canada and Ontario and parts and many other areas of international of the US and England. And so the vision here, I'm sorry if I could just, maybe I'm not sure how to remove this screen at the top, this bar. Anyway, so the architectural narrative that is planned in the urban design guidelines are now taking the Queenston limestone and refining it, and in the classical tradition, which was the main narrative in Niagara-on-the-Lake and Ontario, but in a very contemporary way. And so the unquarried limestones are the massive bedding planes act as a counterpoint of the quarry blocks, but we'll be using dressed and dimensioned stone to construct the residential, institutional, recreational components of the redevelopment. Our redevelopment will respect and embrace the surrounding nature, but will not seek to imitate it, exploring the notion of an ecological integrity that is historical and cultural as well as natural. So this presentation was mainly about the past, and what will be unveiled in months to come will be taking all those cues of this rich cultural landscape and completing the master plan of the site. And so this is not a presentation with respect to kind of that future master plan and architectural narrative, but today was celebrating and honoring its past. And that's it for now.
All right, thank you, Frank. I'm going to open it up to some questions. So we do have some here. So Karen Noonan wanted to know what U.S. structures were constructed by from Queenston limestone.
Well, there are a number of them that I'm doing the research, but the two that I'm most familiar with that I've been able to gather some notes is the Fort Niagara, right across from Niagara-on-the-Lake, is all Queenston limestone. So as we look across the river, that's Queenston limestone. And the first power station, so when Nikola Tesla electrified the world and created the amazing alternating current, the very first power station on the US side was made all of Queenston limestone. I'm slowly gathering those images. And there's only one remaining power station that's in existence and standing today, and it's quite remarkable. Unfortunately, the other ones were taken down and the stone was used elsewhere.
Right. And Marie Wilcox asks, what residential development is planned and has it started?
No, it has not started. We are we're in the final stages of completing the master plan, and there's 4 levels of approvals: the Niagara Escarpment Commission, the Region of Niagara, the Town of Niagara-on-the-Lake, and ultimately the Province of Ontario. So there's a section that has been, we call it 27-acre urban boundary area. Of the 257 acres, 27 acres has gone through the Niagara Escarpment Commission, and those are mid-rise townhomes and mid-rise condominiums. But the unveiling of the full master plan is to follow. What's happening today is if I could describe, although all of this stone was extracted, and as I said, it's a relatively shallow quarry, and you can see the vertical rock face here. And that vertical rock face is about 30 feet in height. There's another 15 feet on top of here, and another 15 feet here. But what happened is that, so the quarrying activity started at the brow, and as you came, and the Queenston limestone was exposed at the brow, but as you came in this direction, the stone was covered with soil, and it was the Secord farm. So starting at the brow, there was 0 soil. Over here, there was 20 feet of soil. All of that soil was stripped and stockpiled up along the south boundary and the Bevan Heights boundary, and some of it was stockpiled here. So now rehabilitating the quarry is to take that material and put it back. And that's what the rehabilitation process is, to take the stripped overburden, which is clean native soil to the site, the overburden, and put back and to vegetate it. And then the other unique beauty of this is that although we are 150 feet above St. David's, the water does leak and travel through the rock, and we have naturally occurring ponds. And we're significantly increasing the number of ponds in the site. And by allowing the water to release, we are shaping the landscape and adding more and more water. So no, the overall master plan has not been unveiled, but we do expect that this year, within 2021, that we will be unveiling phase 1 as well as the full master plan.
So just a couple more questions about that plan. Is there an intention to include the development of an open air museum component so the public can walk around and experience interpretation of the history of the site?
Yes. So yes, with the cooperation of the Niagara Parks Commission, as we stated, all the remaining, aside from the actual quarry faces, which there'll be interpretive opportunities inside the quarry, but the industrial past of the cement kilns, the radar tower, whoops. Yeah. Sorry, 1 second. Maybe I'll take it from this. The foundations for the settlement village, all of which is on public ownership. And so, yes, we'll be working with the Niagara Parks Commission to allow and expand those interpretive opportunities that would be connecting from the Bruce Trail, obviously through the site and to the Bruce Trail. So all of those interpretive opportunities are all under public ownership. And there's this absolutely amazing rail bed that exists right here and goes to the village of Queenston. Very briefly, I think it's worth, because I'll need the community support. That rail line, this is how tourists saw Niagara Falls 100 years ago, was they came from Lake Ontario up the Niagara River, got to the docks of Queenston, couldn't go any further than Queenston, got on a horse-drawn rail car, climbed the escarpment, and came down Stanley Avenue, what is now Stanley Avenue. And that rail bed is absolutely intact in place. But through about 50 to 100 years ago, some other quarrying activity, there's piles of fill material that is obstructing that rail bed. And there's in 3 locations that if that is removed, then we're able to actually create a connection from the village of Queenston up through to the Niagara Parks Commission lands and all those interpretive opportunities. So the answer is yes, and but the ones of significance are all under public ownership.
And Jim Reynolds, this is kind of along the same lines. Would there be plans for a visitor center that could display the geology history and that sort of thing as well?
Yes, there's no doubt that that earth moving that some of you may have noticed is that the rock faces were actually covered in soil, and we're taking the soil off in order to expose those faces. And as a result, we'll be able to actually present that human intervention into those landscapes and provide those interpretive opportunities inside the site. So the answer is yes.
David Murray says that you said that the stone can be polished. So how does he obtain some for his new kitchen?
Well, we don't have the polishing equipment, the cutting equipment or polishing equipment, but I am working with shops in the Greater Toronto area. So I take out blocks of stone and send them to the cutting shops, and the cutting shops will cut them and polish them to exactly your needs. Right now, current activity is the Bell Canada building in Montreal is undergoing a significant restoration. And so I'm taking blocks, Queenston limestone blocks from this location and this location. They're going to a cutting shop in Burlington, being processed there, and then being shipped to Montreal for that restoration of the Bell Canada building. So there's 2 or 3 cutting shops in the Greater Toronto area that are available to build absolutely whatever you please.
Peter Chwanogrodsky wanted to know, was there a significant amount of Queenston limestone used in the bedding of the QEW?
Not at all. Queenston limestone was such a prized stone that was only used for the most important buildings and structures. So what happened across the entire 250-acre landscape, there was the Queenston limestone bedding was only that bottom 15 feet, and that was all removed. And I'm just go to that image very quickly. That was all removed this here from one end of the site to the other. But there are enough pockets that are still within the licensed area that is enough for this heritage restoration that we're working on. But no, they would not have, all of the Queenston limestone was removed. The Goat Island was used as crushed aggregate for the purpose of aggregate supply. And it was also used as a building stone, but it didn't have the quality attributes of the Queenston. So, no, there's other limestones that were used, but not Queenston for the most significant display of Queenston limestone is the third canal, which is all of Queenston limestone blocks that you see running parallel to the GM plant right at Glendale. If you stand at the Glendale Bridge right before you get to the Welland Canal, you look north and south and you'll see these massive Queenston limestone blocks that constructed the canal, but it would not have been used for the Queen Elizabeth Highway.
Murray Wilcox wanted to know if there was a quarry on the US side as well.
I'm not aware of it. You would think this bedding layer goes all the way across. For some reason, there was one section in Thorold that produced Queenston limestone, but that was it. Bob Watson has provided me with most of the research. There may be, I'll look into it further, but I'm not aware of it. But really, all the prized Queenston limestone came only from this location. And as I said, it's a small section in Thorold.
Ashley Pollock wanted to know if any part of the Rochester shale was exposed and possibly accessible for collecting.
The entire quarry floor today is Rochester shale. So the answer is yes. So today, the areas of the site that we can walk along is Rochester shale. They didn't quarry any further down because it didn't have the strength to support, a construction of highways, and that's why the quarry didn't go down any further. So the Goat Island, the Queenston, and a 1 meter layer of DQ, which was used to make the cement, and that's it. And then this is Rochester shale here.
And we have a question about the golf course. Is that happening as part of the development?
Yes, under escarpment recreation designation, there's open space uses, and the open space uses will be walking trails, organic agriculture, and golf is one of the open space uses. So the answer is yes, it has commenced. But having said that, everything's commencing at once. We're rehabilitating the site, and some areas are for the golf, some are for the walking trails, and some areas are preparing for the residential components.
So that goes into the next question from Fran Boot, is how many occupants would live in the development there? And she also asks if there's still limestone available for harvesting.
So the answer is yes. There is limestone available for harvesting. It's quite extraordinary that when you take a block of stone and you cut it, it's quite extraordinary of how much material is available. So in the urban area, there's a 27-acre urban area that is an L shape, and it is designated as mid-rise 4-story condominiums, and that adds up to about just under 1 million square feet on 27 acres, and that, if you were to assume, that would be 750 units, 750 suites, and if you assume 2 people per suite, it's 1,500, could be 2,000 people. There's also a resort designation. Escarpment recreation is, in addition to the residential, is a resort designation. So resort type development is one of the uses that we'll be bringing forward.
Betsy Masson says she was at Willowbank in the summer of 2005 when a geologist visited and informed Laura Dotson that Willowbank was built of whirlpool sandstone, not Queenston limestone, as had been thought. Can you think of any reason that in 1834 Alexander Hamilton would choose sandstone rather than Queenston limestone for his house?
So it turns out, and I should have be nicer if I had a larger picture of Willowbank. It's both. The sandstone is an amazing material, and it's at the bottom of York Road, north of York Road. Down below, there's a quarry there that produced the sandstone, that yielded the sandstone. And then as well, there's also Goat Island and Bob Watson has provided this. There's also Goat Island on Willowbank, but definitely Willowbank. All of the lintels and all of this dressed stone at the base is Queenston limestone. So these horizontal lines here, and any of the lintels above and below the windows, and this strated stone here at the bottom of the large pillars is Queenston limestone.
I just noticed someone put in a question of who is Bob Watson, because you mentioned him a few times. So maybe we can let people know.
Bob Watson is a resident of Niagara-on-the-Lake, a geologist, and has been is just on a number of community committees. His research of quarries and the area and the history of Queenston limestone was extraordinary. He just has a particular passion for it. He's a geologist, and He's an instructor at Willowbank. He's involved in the Landscape of Nations Monument and many other. Most committees in Niagara-on-the-Lake are always calling Bob Watson for his knowledge of the history and specifically when it comes to stone. So he's was on York Road, but now lives in Old Town, Niagara-on-the-Lake.
Des Corin wanted to know how much the Welland Canal stones would have weighed and how they were moved to the site.
That's a good question. Queenston limestone is about 165 pounds per cubic foot. It's quite dense, so it is pretty much exactly 165 pounds a cubic foot. By that time, it appears, and you can see from these other images, it would have been loaded on rail cars and then offloaded. It's completely possible. It was, you know, some locations it may have been through horse and buggy or horse and trailers. But I don't have the images here, but the lifting of all those massive quarry blocks were done by derrick cranes, which were these big timbers, and just using counterpoint weighting and lifting of the blocks, and for the most part putting them on rail cars. In the early days, there were some that were put on horse and wagon, but for the most of that more significant quarry production, it was on our earliest rail cars. How it was offloaded from there, I actually don't have the specifics, and I look to finding out.
This is a question about the hiking trails in the area there. So Craig wanted to know, is the North Side Trail accessible for hiking from both Brock's Monument and a western opening? If so, where would we start at the western end?
So yeah, the west end, it starts the east end starts at the Brock Monument. The west end, I guess if you want to call it, it comes out at Town Line Road and 4 Mile Creek Road. So the Bruce Trail you have to come off that little side road off of 4 Mile Creek Road at Town Line Road, and then it hugs the escarpment, and that was a rail line that that hugs around, and before it gets to York Road, you have this relatively steep incline to get up, and it's probably one of the more and it's very significant. It's a good 60, 70 feet of incline to get up to the elevation to get back up to the Bruce Trail at the the top of the escarpment. So it is continuous, but people do walk through. They'll take a little side trail through our property and onto Melrose Drive, and get onto Melrose Drive and then walk down Town Line Road. But it specifically, it starts at 4 Mile Creek Road and Town Line Road, and then carries on all the way, to Woodlands, crosses the Queen Elizabeth, and there is no starting point. The trail is 700 kilometers long, but it can be accessed from York Road and Concession 2, and it can be accessed from Town Line Road and 4 Mile Creek Road.
Great. We have a question. Have you engaged with the Canadian Land Reclamation Association with respect to the stockpiled soil, or the Aggregate Producers Association of Ontario with respect to reclaiming the quarry?
We are, let's say yes, we are still a licensed quarry, and if I can describe, a license does two things. One, it's a license to extract, but that same license is the legal obligation to rehabilitate. So the Ministry of Natural Resources and the associations monitor all the activity to ensure that we're engaging in progressive rehabilitation. And the license isn't released until the rehabilitation is complete. Rehabilitation can happen in parts, and it does. You rehabilitate one section, it gets released, another section, it gets released. So we are monitored by the Ministry of Natural Resources. We report to the aggregate associations, and that is our statutory requirement with a quarry license, and that will carry on until it's completely rehabilitated.
I just noticed a comment here from Karen Noonan, who's one of our members in on the US side, and she said there are quarries in Lewiston and Lockport.
Okay.
Art Park is built on one of the quarries.
Yes. Okay. Thank you for that. Yeah, which makes sense. What I don't know whether or not there's different bedding layers on the escarpment, and then specifically was Queenston limestone one of the sources of that quarry, and I look forward to looking into it. Right at the Art Park, those bridge abutments that are still standing that you see at Art Park, kind of hanging off the bank, and there's also one on the Canadian side. Those bridge abutments to create that suspension bridge is Queenston limestone. But specifically whether or not Queenston limestone was quarried on the US side, I don't know, but it's likely.
We have one question here. What is the green space and pond in the foreground? And I'm not sure what image she's referring to. It could be the one that I included on the Facebook event page. So Annie Michaud or Michaud, if you could maybe specify which image you're referring to. But her second question, possibly, her second question is there a significant volume of groundwater discharge on the site?
So I'd say yes and no. So what happens is, so as I said, the Queenston Quarry is 150 feet above St. David's. So as water travels through the rock, it populates these ponds, and then it leaves by gravity right here in this little corner of this pond right here. There's a little trench, and there's a little pipe that was installed probably 50 years ago that goes right through the brow. And so 100% of the water that falls within this 250 acre landscape ends up in this pond, leaves through this little trench, goes down the escarpment by gravity, and crosses York Road right at Concession 2 at the General Schaeff Monument. So if you go if you go to York Road and the General Schaeff Monument, just east of Concession 2, you'll see a little stream, and that is 100% of the water that leaves the site, goes under York Road, and goes into the farm irrigation system. So 100% of the water within this property leaves and goes into the farm irrigation system throughout all Niagara-on-the-Lake, and then ultimately ends up in Lake Ontario.
Great. Any idea when the project will be complete? I'm sure you get that asked that a lot.
Well, there's two definitions of complete. I would say that the majority of the open space landscape we expect will be completed in 2 to 3 years. But the residential components are going to be based on demand. So whatever is, whatever areas of real estate that are not built or unsold will just be a lawn in the landscape, and will kind of merge, and then slowly some of the, the balance of the buildings will populate. But it will be, 85 to 90% of this landscape ends up being green. The actual roofs that you see that we'll see in the master plan will probably represent 5 to 10% of the area. So what we call the landscape, the walking trails, the agriculture, golf components should be complete in 2 to 3 years. And I would regard that as the site being done. And you could be inhabiting and living in phase 1 or phase 2, depending on how quickly or slowly things sell. But most certainly that people will be moving into a finished landscape. And yes, there'll be some other blocks that have not been developed, but will just like, you know, the neighboring property going under construction next to you. But relatively speaking, it's, as I said, is about 10% of the site will be developed, and the other 90 is open space.
Suzanne Bear wanted to know how much of the limestone is left and for how long could it be used without disappearing?
So there's plenty of limestone for, I'd say, heritage, the speed of which I'm producing stone for heritage restoration. I'd say it's not unreasonable to be, you know, next 20 to 50 years. It's not a significant supply. Restoration is just that, is restoration. What makes it a little bit easier for us to have stone for our buildings is that any one of these quarry faces, so let's say right now the limit of quarrying is set by the Minister of Natural Resources, and there's a setback when it's being sold to third party, when it's leaving the property. But for internal use, we can go into a quarry face. So we can cut back a quarry face 15 feet by 300, 400 feet, and that will produce all the stone that we would need for our internal purposes. So the answer to the question is, because we can go into the quarry faces for our own internal use, and the areas that just were remaining, that there are certain pockets that just didn't get quarried out. I think what happens, there were just other significant operations going on and areas got covered. But the amount of volume, just to give you a sense of, for example, for the Bell Canada building in Montreal, a total of, you know, 6 trailer loads of stone would be more than sufficient to do, you know, 2 Bell Canada restorations, and that's a significant one. So we think certainly that the beauty of that Queenston limestone faces are going to be exposed, and they'll be there forever. But how much will be remaining for heritage restoration? I'd say I'm going to say a 50-year supply, and there could be more. You could make an application to the Ontario government, and because it's such an important heritage resource, there could be an application to the province to go deeper into a face for another. Like, for example, if the courthouse needed some stone and there was none available anywhere else, I'd imagine that if there's an appeal to the Minister of Natural Resources to do some restoration for the courthouse, that I'd be able to get a license to remove a small amount for external purposes. So I'd say 50 years for restoration purposes, and then there's plenty for our internal purposes.
Great. So we still have about a dozen questions. So I hope you don't mind sticking around.
Yeah,
We understand if people do need to leave the presentation because we've been an hour, but hopefully people will stick around if you want to hear the answers or hear your questions. So Craig Tallman, who I know is from Grimsby, he would like to know, is the Grimsby sandstone layer the same type of stone from the former Gibson Quarry near Beamer's Point in Grimsby? To a non-geologist, the Gibson Quarry stone looks like your limestone.
I don't know. Bob Watson would know. I mean, thank you for that. I will follow up and obtain the answer either through Bob or through other sources. Thank you, but no, I don't know the answer.
All right. Renee, who does a lot of drone video shots in town here, wants to get in touch with you about giving you some drone footage of the quarry, railway, and the village on the escarpment. So I'll pass along his or your email to him so he can get in touch with you about that. That'd be great, Renee.
Thank you.
And Denise wanted to know, would this type of Queenston limestone be found further along the escarpment, such as in Halton Hills?
No. Bob explained it to me once I wasn't taking notes. For whatever reason, this particular bedding layer, and I guess just what occurred by Mother Nature is just unique to this location. And as I said, there were a couple spots in Thorold. I mean, I went to Walker's Quarry. There was a time when I didn't have access to all the faces, and there was a stone supply that I was working on for restoration, and I couldn't get the size of the blocks that I was looking for. So I said, how possibly could it be different? So I went over to the Walker's Quarry there at Taylor Road and looked at the face, and I said it looked quite similar. And Bob explained to me the geology of how it is different. And then sure enough, it's just not, it just doesn't have the compression strength. It didn't have the crinoids. It just didn't have the same makeup. And so it just doesn't, even though you follow that bedding layer east and west, these were big, apparently these are big shoals that kind of swayed up and down, and I guess at times went to 0 to 20 feet high to 5 feet high, and it just doesn't exist anywhere else.
Christine Earle wanted to know when the old truck tires would be removed from the old quarry.
We're trying to find those are the big monster truck tires that were there from the some of the equipment that Lafarge and the previous quarry owners had. I'm trying to find someone to take them, but they do come in handy sometimes when there are people who do kind of walk and kind of trespass into the quarry, and there are areas that are somewhat dangerous, and they're handy to have in order to kind of block an area that could be dangerous. I've contacted Niagara Battery Tire and they won't take them, so I am looking for someone to take them. So in the meantime, they do offer some kind of short-term helpfulness in terms of blocking off any unsafe locations. But if they do leach, I believe they don't leach. I'm sure they don't, because we have our water tested and our soils tested all the time. But I'll thank you for that. I'll look into that a little closer.
That kind of goes into a question, another question. Can the public walk through the quarry and see the faces of the quarry today?
Yeah, it's one of my biggest challenges is that it's such a unique landscape, and people are curious, and with my supervision, yes, if they could contact me, absolutely, I will take them and show them. But there is heavy equipment on site, and it is a site under rehabilitation, and of course, the liability and safety that goes with a construction site. So no, kind of unsupervised access is not permitted, but I'm often happy to take people through and show them around. And so reach out to me, and I'm there every day.
Bob Sears is just noting that another one of our members, Sherry Spark, her house in Welland has Queenston limestone in the door and window sills and corner pieces, and the house was built in 1951.
Mm-hmm. Yes, it really was. I mean, there's the competing stone is Indiana limestone, and it was that 150 years ago, 100 years ago, and it is till this day. So most people who are building, there are other stones, of course, but the one that's predominant is Indiana limestone. But if you just anywhere in Hamilton, St. Catharines, the Niagara Peninsula, pretty much most of the stone lintels that you see above windows and doors and steps is Queenston. It was it was available. It was the premium material, and it was always a little bit more expensive than Indiana. Indiana is literally a mountain of stone with very significant production. There was one restoration a new build in Ottawa that was a contemporary addition to that Bank of Montreal building, and the powers that be decided on Indiana limestone for one of Canada's most important ceremonial buildings. So I'm still competing with Indiana till this day, and there are stories in the papers from the 1920s and 30s of Queenston competing with Indiana. So anyway, it's certainly locally, and it doesn't take long to get the hang of it to distinguish Indiana from Queenston. The Queenston, when you take a close look, you'll see those crinoid fossils, whereas Indiana, you don't. It's just it looks like a compressed sand.
Peter wanted to know if the building at 32 Church Street, St. Catharines, Canada Revenue Agency, Lower Secord building, was built with Queenston limestone.
The one that's in St. Catharines next to City Hall. Repeat the building again.
There's 32 Queen. Hold on, there we go.
I have a list of, the list is growing, but let me just.
Oh, sorry, 32 Church Street. And if you don't have it there on that list,
I don't have the answer. That one I will, if you could email that to me, I'll like to go by and have a look.
Sure.
Yeah. This was published. This was published in kind of the more significant buildings, but there are just many.
Right. Yeah.
So but yeah, send me an email with, and I'll get back to you.
Sure. There's a few questions here from Fran Boot. Whereabouts on York Road was the additional quarry? And would there always be ongoing quarrying happening?
There was, the quarry on York Road was not part of, that was a sandstone quarry. Again, Bob Watson. It's down close to the rail line, and it wasn't owned by the former owners of the Queenston Quarry. Would have been part of the Secord Farm. And let me just go to that. So if you're referring to when I mentioned earlier, the one in York Road, that is a sandstone quarry right at the bottom of the face of the escarpment. And just give you a sense of, sorry. Oh, sorry. Yeah, so that is no longer operational. It's a sandstone quarry. And I just wanted to, this is how far Whirlpool sandstone is. And this is like 300 feet. So you can imagine the Queenston Quarry is up top and the Whirlpool sandstone is down below. And, but that is, there's residential home in front of it, and the owner wanted to take out some stone and the ministry said no. But that is the sandstone quarry that I'm aware of, which is a very, very hard stone. But that was never part of the Queenston Quarry. That's there's 3 homes there and it's no longer operational. Sorry, what was the second half of the question?
Would there always be ongoing quarrying?
I intend to have, I'm going to say yes for the purpose of heritage restoration. It's such an amazing material, and it would be a shame not to. I guess there is a point where it would have to stop. You can't go past our property line. The small scale, the answer would be yes, but at a very small scale. Like, you know, for example, there may be a sculpture competition and want to take out, you know, 5 or 6 blocks in order to have a sculpture competition or sculpture festival. But by no means is nothing of a large scale. And even what we're doing is not even large scale. It's quite very, very small. It's a wire saw that cuts the stone off the wall, and it's relatively kind of minor and quiet in nature. There's no blasting. You can't blast the stone. You have to actually cut it with a wire saw, or you use plugs and feathers. So it's a very quiet. It takes work, but it's a pretty simple or non-invasive process. So the answer would be yes, but again, small scale for important heritage restoration.
And she also wanted to know how much limestone would be used in the residential section of the site.
We're working through that as we speak. So it is part of the narrative, there's no doubt. The buildings are going to be quite contemporary, and contemporary means there's more glass to take advantage. And the purpose of the glass, of course, is the beautiful vistas of that landscape. So I'd say that even if a building had 100% Queenston limestone, it still probably only represent 20%, 25% of the surface of the building, and that the remainder is glass.
Is there any thought of recreating a wetland? This is from Elizabeth Oliver Malone.
Well, there never was a wetland there. It was the Secord Farm. As I said, there's 20 feet of soil on the land before you got to rock. So there was no wetlands in this particular location. It was, kind of on the escarpment, and then kind of water kind of just, went in its various directions. But what was a farm and a quarry will now have, I'm going to say, probably from no ponds to a significant amount of water is contemplated in the master plan. Just to give you an example, like this pond here stays exactly where it is. In fact, it's being enlarged. This pond we created this pond, we created that one, and we're creating a whole series of ponds along here. So there'll be a lot more water than there is today and there ever was before. But I wouldn't say that there's wet. And well, the edges of the ponds is considered wetlands. So I'm going to give that a partial yes.
There's a couple of questions here about the possibility of doing like a walkabout tour, and if that's something that could be arranged at the state at some point. Obviously, right now with COVID, things are a little bit difficult with gathering large groups together. But is that something that we could maybe arrange in the future?
Absolutely, yes.
Great.
Well, thank you for that. Yes.
And Sandy Claire Colombe wanted to know where she can find out about sales of the lots.
That would be me, but we're not ready. And that unveiling will happen in 2021 this year. We're certainly ready to go in terms of, well, anxious to get going. It's been a very, very long time. But we're working through the final site plan approvals with the region, the town, and Niagara Escarpment Commission. We're completing our costing, and expect that to be done within, I wouldn't say weeks, but within months. And then we will be unveiling, and when we unveil, we will be selling. So it'll be this year. I just reluctant to give a date because disappointing if I can't meet that date. But certainly we are going full steam ahead and trying to get to market as quickly as possible. It has been 14 years of work, and it's been a labor of love for sure. And it's very difficult in Ontario to find unique places, and this is why this is a keeper. As I said at the beginning of the presentation, there'll be in Ontario, anything that has, that's a beautiful landscape cannot be inhabited. And there may be some philosophical discussions of why that's just not right. But this is as other than maybe, owning a lot on the Niagara River or on Lake Ontario, this is as dramatic and beautiful as it gets in terms of finally having a place where the views are of trees, water, and green space, and that actually permits development. Usually when you find trees, water, and green space, I don't want to say the word development is not permitted, that human habitation is not permitted. And there's a real discussion that, philosophical discussion of how can we inhabit the landscape in a responsible way. I believe it is doable. So anyway, for us, this is for me, all the places I've seen in Ontario, this is kind of one of a kind, and it came about in an unintended way. This was the most important industrial landscape in Upper Canada. The building blocks of bridges and monuments, and like for the Grand Trunk Railway, all the bridge abutments, etc., came from here, and that was really the building blocks that kind of moved us forward. And now, it's created this topography of 50 feet of change of elevation, and as soon as you have elevation, water, now you have a very beautiful, dramatic landscape. So yeah, it's as good as it gets in terms of places to inhabit. But I've always said that one day when this is done, I might, have a speaking tour of it's not a coincidence that most subdivisions look like just subdivisions, and it's not the builder developer's fault. There's a process that leads you down, and you or I can have the most dramatic, amazing ideas, and then when we get started, you've never built before, and you have amazing vision, architectural, green vision, and then as you go down the process, you end up being funneled down to what is a apple pie looking subdivision. And there's good reason for it and not good reason for it, but you inevitably end up there. And that's why most new subdivisions are just a lot less interesting than what we would imagine. And part of it is, there's no one is at fault, but there's a different, planning process and environmental process that could use a reconciliation of how you inhabit special places. And again, it's doable at the right level. But so for us, unfortunately, I can't find anything that's unique. And as much as I try to find other places, I enjoy building, and because it's a very creative, fulfilling process. And but try to find a unique place is I'm going to say impossible. So anyway, this is as good as it gets. And anyway, that's a little it's another.
That's great. I think
discussion another day.
I think we'll end it right there. I think that's a good spot to end. So thank you so much. There's also lots of thank you comments and really interested in finding out the history of the site and everything. So I think it could be great if we could maybe organize something in the future, a walk around the site for people who are more interested. So thanks again, Frank, for joining us today. Again, if you want to help support our lecture series and our other programming, I've put the link to our donation page there in the chat, and we appreciate all the donations we've received so far. It's telling me my internet is unstable, so I'm sorry if I get choppy. But our next lecture, which is in just a couple weeks, is on, oh, sorry, one second. There we go. It's on April 7th, and this time it's going to be at 10:30 a.m. So just note the slight change in time from the other lectures. And this one is going to be Robert J. Lake presenting a front seat among the playgrounds of two nations, lawn tennis in Niagara-on-the-Lake, circa 1880s to 1920. So should be another really interesting talk. So thanks to everyone, and we will see you in a couple weeks.
Well, thank